Sarah Mitchell stood at her kitchen window, watching the morning fog roll across the base housing complex like a gray blanket, slowly revealing the day beneath. Her coffee steamed in her hands as she checked her phone for any messages from Marcus. Her husband had been deployed for 3 months now, somewhere in the Middle East where his Navy SEAL team was conducting operations she wasn't allowed to know about. The silence between his brief, carefully worded texts felt heavier each day. At 32, Sarah had learned to navigate the unique rhythm of military life. While other wives complained about their husbands working late or traveling for business, she measured time in deployments, homecomings, and the spaces in between where she built a life strong enough to stand alone. The base in Coronado provided a community of women who understood this particular kind of strength, but Sarah often felt like an outsider, even among them. She had met Marcus 8 years ago in a coffee shop near UCLA, where she was finishing her degree in elementary education. He was on leave, wearing civilian clothes, looking nothing like the warrior she would later discover him to be. Their conversation started over a shared table during the lunch rush and lasted until the shop closed. She learned he was in the Navy, but it took months of dating before she understood what his quiet confidence and careful habits really meant. Marcus never talked about his work directly. Instead, she learned through observation and the careful way he moved through the world. How he always sat facing the door in restaurants. How he could assess every person in a room within seconds of entering. How he taught her to check her car before getting in, to vary her routes home, to trust her instincts when something felt wrong. What seemed like paranoia to others felt like love to Sarah. He was teaching her to protect herself in a world where his job made enemies of dangerous people. The morning routine she had developed during his deployments kept her grounded. Coffee at 6, a run through the base at 7, shower and breakfast by 8:30, then off to Coronado Elementary where she taught 3rd grade. Her students provided a beautiful distraction from the worry that lived in the back of her mind. 8-year-olds didn't care about operational security or classified missions. They cared about story time and whether they could earn extra recess. Today felt different, though she couldn't pinpoint why. The fog seemed thicker, the base quieter than usual. Even her neighbor's dog, usually barking at anything that moved, remained silent in his yard. Sarah finished her coffee and checked the locks on her doors, a habit Marcus had insisted on even though they lived on one of the most secure military installations in the country. Her phone buzzed with a text from her teaching partner, Jenny. "Running late today. Can you handle morning setup?" Sarah replied with a quick confirmation and gathered her school bag. She taught at a school that served both military families and local civilians, creating a unique environment where deployment cycles and normal family life intersected daily. The drive to school took her off base and through the quiet streets of Coronado. She loved this town with its perfect weather and postcard beaches, but sometimes the paradise-like setting felt surreal when she knew her husband was in a war zone. The contrast between her peaceful morning commute and Marcus's reality seemed impossible to reconcile. At school, Sarah unlocked her classroom and began arranging the day's materials. Her 3rd graders were working on a unit about heroes, and today they would share presentations about people they admired. She expected the usual mix of firefighters, police officers, parents, and athletes. Several of her students with deployed parents would likely choose to talk about their mothers or fathers in uniform. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was teaching about heroes while married to someone whose heroism had to remain largely invisible. Marcus's commendations and awards sat in a box at home, most of them classified to the point where she couldn't even understand what they represented. She knew he had saved lives and completed missions that mattered, but the details lived in a world she could only glimpse through his careful silences and the way his eyes sometimes went distant during quiet moments. Jenny arrived as the first students were being dropped off, looking frazzled and apologetic. "Thank you for covering. Tom's flight was delayed, and I had to do the whole morning rush alone." Jenny's husband was a Navy pilot, currently deployed to the Pacific. The two women had bonded over the shared experience of managing life during deployments, though Jenny didn't know the full extent of what Marcus did beyond his official designation as Special Operations. The morning progressed normally until shortly before lunch when Sarah received a call from the main office. "Mrs. Mitchell, you have a visitor." Can you send your students to the library for early lunch and come to the main desk? The secretary's voice carried an odd tension that made Sarah's stomach tighten. Visitors during school hours were rare and usually meant bad news. She arranged for her students to go to lunch early and walk to the main office, her heart rate increasing with each step. Through the glass doors, she could see a woman in a dark suit speaking quietly with the principal. The woman turned as Sarah approached, and something in her expression made the air feel heavier. "Mrs. Mitchell, I'm Agent Catherine Torres from NCIS. Is there somewhere we can speak privately?" The badge she showed looked official, but Sarah had learned to be cautious about anyone claiming authority. Marcus had taught her that real threats often came disguised as legitimate officials. In the principal's office with the door closed, Agent Torres sat across from Sarah with a manila folder in her hands. "Mrs. Mitchell, I need to ask you some questions about your husband's current deployment. When did you last hear from him?" The question sent ice through Sarah's veins. 3 days ago. He sent a text saying he was fine and would call when he could. Is something wrong? Has something happened to Marcus? Her voice remained steady, but her hands clenched in her lap. "We believe your husband's team has gathered intelligence about a trafficking operation with connections to Southern California. There's reason to think the organization might attempt to leverage family members to compromise ongoing operations. Have you noticed anything unusual lately? Anyone following you? Strangers asking questions? Changes in your routine?" Sarah's mind raced through the past week, searching for details that might have seemed insignificant. "No, nothing like that. Everything's been normal." "What kind of trafficking operation?" She remembered Marcus's teachings about operational security and how even innocent questions could reveal dangerous information. Agent Torres hesitated before answering. "Human trafficking, specifically children. Your husband's team disrupted a major supply line, and the organization is looking for ways to retaliate. We think they've identified families of team members." She paused and studied Sarah's face carefully. "Mrs. Mitchell, we need you to consider protective custody until the threat level decreases." The suggestion hit Sarah like cold water. Protective custody meant acknowledging that her normal life was in danger, that the war Marcus fought had followed him home. It meant admitting that her quiet strength might not be enough against people who made violence their profession. How long would protective custody last? And what about my students? I can't just disappear from their lives without explanation. Sarah's mind immediately went to her third graders, who needed stability and routine more than most children because of their military family circumstances. "We're hoping it would only be a few days, maybe a week. The operation your husband's team is conducting should wrap up soon." Agent Torres leaned forward slightly. "Mrs. Mitchell, these people don't hesitate to hurt innocent families to achieve their goals. Your safety directly impacts your husband's ability to complete his mission." Sarah understood the unspoken message. If she became a liability, it would compromise Marcus and his team. Every SEAL wife lived with the knowledge that their security mattered beyond just their own well-being. "If I agree to protective custody, what does that look like? Where would I go?" "We have a safe house about an hour north of here. You would be accompanied by trained agents at all times. You could maintain limited contact with family and friends, but your movements would be restricted." Agent Torres opened her folder and showed Sarah some photographs. "These are surveillance photos of individuals we believe are connected to the trafficking organization. Have you seen any of these people?" Sarah studied each photograph carefully, Marcus's voice in her memory, reminding her to trust her instincts and notice details others might miss. The faces were mostly unremarkable, but something about one photograph made her pause. A man in his 40s with dark hair and a small scar above his left eyebrow. "I think I might have seen this man, but I'm not certain where." "Take your time. Even small details matter." Agent Torres watched Sarah's face as she continued examining the photograph. The memory came slowly, like a photograph developing. "The grocery store. Maybe 3 days ago. He was in the parking lot when I came out, and I had the feeling he was watching me, but when I looked directly at him, he was on his phone." Sarah felt foolish for not trusting the instinct that had made her uncomfortable that day. Agent Torres made a note in her file. "That confirms our intelligence. Mrs. Mitchell, They've been surveilling you. We need to move quickly. She stood and moved toward the door. You can gather some personal items from your home, but we need to escort you, and we can't stay long. As they prepared to leave the school, Sarah felt the weight of how quickly her ordinary Tuesday had transformed into something from one of Marcus's classified missions. She thought about her students returning from lunch to find a substitute teacher with no explanation for her absence. She thought about Marcus, somewhere dangerous and far away, not knowing that the war had reached their quiet home. The drive back to base felt different now, as if the familiar streets had become a potential battlefield. Agent Torres followed her in an unmarked sedan while Sarah drove her own car, checking her mirrors constantly and noticing details she had never paid attention to before. The peaceful morning fog had burned off completely, leaving the day bright and clear, but Sarah felt like she was moving through shadows. At her house, two more agents waited in the driveway. They moved with the same economy of motion she recognized in Marcus and his teammates, professional warriors who made their presence known without seeming threatening. As Sarah packed a bag with essentials, she found herself selecting items not just for comfort, but for utility. The practical lessons Marcus had taught her were becoming real in ways she had hoped to never experience. In her bedroom, Sarah opened the small safe where Marcus kept important documents and some of his personal military equipment. Inside was a letter with her name on it, written in his careful handwriting. She had never seen it before, but somehow knew it was meant for exactly this kind of moment. With shaking hands, she opened the envelope and read words that changed everything she thought she understood about her role in their life together. The letter was written on simple white paper, but Marcus's words carried the weight of years of unspoken truths. Sarah sat on the edge of their bed, her packed bag forgotten as she read her husband's careful handwriting. Sarah, if you're reading this, it means the job has touched our home in ways I hoped it never would. I've spent 8 years trying to protect you from this world, but I realize now that protection and preparation aren't the same thing. You're stronger than you know and smarter than I sometimes give you credit for. The training I've given you wasn't paranoia, it was preparation. Trust your instincts, trust your training, and remember that surviving isn't about being fearless, it's about acting despite fear. The key to the gun safe is taped under the bathroom sink. I love you more than mission success, and that's saying something. Marcus. Her hands trembled as she processed what he was telling her. The gun safe. In all their years together, Marcus had never mentioned a gun safe. Sarah walked to their bathroom and knelt beside the sink, running her fingers along the underside of the cabinet until she felt something small and metallic taped to the wood. A tiny key, so small she almost missed it. Back in the bedroom, she began examining the walls and furniture with new eyes. The large bookshelf against the far wall looked different now, and when she pressed against a specific section, a panel slid aside to reveal a compact safe. The key fit perfectly, and inside she found something that made her breath catch. A Glock 19, the same model Marcus had taught her to shoot during their second year of marriage. At the time, she had thought his insistence on firearms training was excessive, but she had learned to respect his judgment about security matters. Beside the gun lay a magazine loaded with ammunition, a small tactical flashlight, and another envelope with her name. The second letter was shorter, but more urgent. If you're reading this, immediate danger is likely. The weapon is loaded and ready. Remember your training. The first rule isn't to shoot, it's to survive. Create distance, find cover, call for help, escape if possible, fight only as a last resort. But if you have to fight, fight to win. You're not a victim, you're a survivor. Trust yourself. Agent Torres knocked on the bedroom door. Mrs. Mitchell, we need to move in the next few minutes. Her voice carried new urgency that made Sarah's heart rate spike. Just a moment, Sarah called back, quickly closing the safe and replacing the panel. She slipped the gun into her bag beneath her clothes, along with the letters. Something in her gut told her that protective custody might not be as safe as it sounded, and Marcus's words echoed in her mind about trusting her instincts. As they prepared to leave the house, Sarah noticed details she had missed during her earlier rush to pack. One of the agents kept checking his phone with the focused attention of someone receiving important updates. Agent Torres moved with the fluid awareness of someone comfortable with danger, but the other agents seemed less experienced, more nervous. The convoy that left the base included Agent Torres' sedan, followed by Sarah's car with an agent as passenger, and a third vehicle bringing up the rear. As they merged onto Interstate 5 heading north, Sarah found herself applying lessons Marcus had taught her about situational awareness. She watched the patterns of traffic, noted which vehicles maintained consistent distances from their convoy, and paid attention to her escort agent's behavior. Agent Davis, riding in her passenger seat, seemed competent but young. He made conversation about the weather and local traffic, but Sarah sensed he was following a script designed to keep her calm. His casual manner felt forced, and he kept touching a bulge under his jacket that was probably a concealed weapon. 30 minutes into the drive, Sarah noticed a dark SUV that had been maintaining position behind them since they left Coronado. When their convoy took the exit toward Carlsbad, the SUV followed. When they made a seemingly random turn at Agent Torres' direction, the SUV made the same turn. Marcus had taught her that coincidences in surveillance were rarely coincidental. Agent Davis, Sarah said carefully, that vehicle behind us has been following us since we left base. Is that part of your security protocol? Davis glanced in his mirrors, and his casual demeanor shifted slightly. He reached for his radio and spoke in code Sarah didn't understand, but his tone indicated concern. Agent Torres' voice crackled back through the radio with instructions that made Davis sit straighter in his seat. They were approaching a section of highway that wound through hills covered with expensive homes and sparse traffic. Sarah realized this was the perfect location for someone to intercept their convoy away from witnesses and potential help. The dark SUV was closing the distance between them, and now she could see there were at least 3 occupants. Mrs. Mitchell, we're going to take some evasive maneuvers, Agent Davis said, his training overriding his script. Please buckle your seatbelt tightly and hold on. The radio crackled with rapid communications between the 3 vehicles in their convoy. Agent Torres was coordinating what sounded like an emergency protocol, but something in the tone of the responses worried Sarah. This felt less like a planned security measure and more like a reaction to an unexpected threat. The dark SUV suddenly accelerated and moved into the passing lane, drawing alongside the rear security vehicle. Sarah watched in her side mirror as the SUV forced the trailing car toward the shoulder of the highway. She could see muzzle flashes from inside the SUV, and the rear security car swerved violently before coming to a stop in a cloud of dust and smoke. Contact rear, contact rear. Agent Davis shouted into his radio, reaching for his weapon. But instead of returning fire or calling for backup, he turned to Sarah with an expression that made her blood freeze. Mrs. Mitchell, you need to cooperate fully with what's about to happen. Your husband's life depends on it. The words hit her like a physical blow. Agent Davis wasn't protecting her. He was part of whatever was happening. The realization came with perfect clarity, along with Marcus's voice in her memory, reminding her that real threats often came disguised as protection. Agent Torres' sedan had pulled ahead and was signaling for Sarah to follow, but now Sarah understood this wasn't an escort to safety. This was an abduction disguised as protective custody, with federal agents either compromised or fake. Her mind raced through her options as Agent Davis kept his weapon trained on her while trying to maintain the appearance of normalcy for any passing motorists. Drive normally and follow Agent Torres, Davis instructed. Any deviation from our route or any attempt to signal for help will result in immediate consequences for both you and your husband's team. Sarah's hands gripped the steering wheel as she processed the implications. If these people had compromised federal agents, they had access to real intelligence about Marcus's mission. If they were using her as leverage, it meant Marcus's team was probably still alive, but in extreme danger. Either way, her next decisions would affect more lives than just her own. The safe house they directed her to was isolated, set back from the road behind a gate, and high walls. It looked legitimate from the outside, the kind of place where federal agencies might actually keep protected witnesses. But as they pulled up the circular driveway, Sarah noticed details that contradicted that assumption. The windows were barred from the outside, rather than secured from within. The landscaping provided concealment rather than pleasant views. This was a prison disguised as a refuge. 3 more men waited in the driveway, dressed like federal agents, but moving with the predatory awareness Sarah associated with criminals rather than law enforcement. As Agent Davis escorted her toward the front door, Sarah made mental notes about escape routes, vehicle positions, and potential weapons. Marcus's training kicked in automatically, her mind cataloging tactical information while her body moved in apparent compliance. Inside the house, the pretense of protective custody disappeared completely. The windows were covered with heavy curtains, electronic equipment hummed from multiple rooms, and armed guards stationed themselves at strategic positions. Agent Torres revealed herself completely by producing zip-tie restraints instead of offering Sarah a comfortable chair. "Mrs. Mitchell, you're going to help us send a message to your husband," Torres said, no longer bothering with the concerned federal agent persona. "His team has something that belongs to our organization, and you're going to convince him to return it." Sarah allowed them to secure her to a chair while her mind calculated distances and possibilities. They had taken her bag, but hadn't searched it thoroughly, missing the weapon Marcus had left for exactly this situation. They assumed she was a helpless military wife who would break under pressure and do whatever they demanded to protect her husband. They had no idea that Marcus Mitchell's wife had spent 8 years learning from one of the world's most elite warriors. They didn't know about the hundreds of hours she had spent on shooting ranges and self-defense classes and absorbing lessons about survival and combat. They saw what she had always allowed people to see, a quiet elementary school teacher who seemed gentle and unassuming. What they didn't see was someone who had learned to think tactically, who understood how to assess threats and create opportunities, and who had internalized the warrior mindset that Marcus represented. They had made the fatal mistake of underestimating their prisoner, and Sarah began planning how to make them pay for that assumption. The leader of the group made a phone call in another language, probably Spanish, while Sarah observed the patterns of guard rotation and communication. She counted at least 6 armed men in addition to the compromised agents, but their positioning suggested they were more familiar with intimidation than actual combat. They bunched together instead of maintaining proper fields of fire. They left blind spots in their coverage, and they assumed their prisoner was helpless. As evening approached, they brought Sarah a meal and explained their plan. They would contact Marcus's team and demand in exchange the intelligence they had gathered about the trafficking operation in return for Sarah's safety. They seemed confident that Marcus would prioritize his wife over the mission, unaware that Sarah would never allow herself to be used to compromise the safety of innocent trafficking victims. When they left her alone for a few minutes while coordinating their communications equipment, Sarah began working on her restraints. Marcus had taught her multiple methods for escaping zip ties, and she had practiced enough to do it quietly and efficiently. As darkness fell outside the heavily curtained windows, she prepared for the most important test of everything her husband had taught her about survival, combat, and the warrior mindset. The next few hours would determine whether she remained a victim or became something much more dangerous. The men holding her captive were about to discover that they had made a critical error in judgment, one that would cost them more than they could imagine. Sarah Mitchell was done being underestimated, and Marcus's lessons were about to prove their value in the most deadly way possible. Sarah had been tied to the chair for 3 hours when she heard the conversation that changed everything. The guards thought she was asleep, her head resting forward in apparent exhaustion, but Marcus's training had taught her how to maintain awareness while appearing unconscious. Their voices carried from the next room as they discussed their plans with casual cruelty that made her stomach turn. "The elementary school teacher won't last long once we start sending pieces of her to the SEAL team," one of them said in accented English. "These military wives think they're tough, but they break fast when real pain starts." Another voice laughed with genuine malice. "Rodriguez wants to make an example with this one. Show all the special operations families what happens when they interfere with business. The husband's team cost us $12 million and a major supply route." The conversation continued, revealing details that painted a picture more horrific than Sarah had imagined. This wasn't just about money or territory. The trafficking organization they were discussing specialized in children, some as young as 6 years old. Marcus's team had disrupted an operation that was moving dozens of victims through Southern California to buyers across the country. Sarah's rage built slowly, controlled, and focused the way Marcus had taught her to channel emotion into tactical advantage. These men were responsible for destroying the lives of innocent children, and they planned to use her as a tool to prevent justice from reaching them. The thought of Marcus being forced to choose between her life and the lives of trafficking victims made her decision clear and simple. She would not be a victim. She would not be leverage. She would be what Marcus had trained her to become. Working carefully, Sarah began testing her restraints using techniques Marcus had shown her during what she had thought were overly paranoid self-defense sessions. The zip ties were tight, but not professionally applied. Her captors had assumed she would struggle frantically and tire herself out, not that she would methodically exploit their sloppy work. The key was patience and precise movement. She worked her wrists in small, controlled motions that gradually loosened the plastic restraints without creating the noise that would alert her guards. Marcus had made her practice this until she could escape zip ties in under 10 minutes, even with her hands behind her back. While she worked, Sarah memorized everything she could observe about the house and her captors. 6 guards total, rotating in pairs with one always stationed near her chair. They carried what looked like military-style rifles, but handled them with the carelessness of people more used to intimidating civilians than engaging in actual combat. Their leader, who had introduced himself as Rodriguez, maintained constant radio communication with someone he called the Colonel. The compromised federal agents had left hours ago, probably to maintain their cover and provide false reports about her protective custody. That meant no legitimate law enforcement knew her real location or situation. If she was going to survive this, it would be entirely up to her own skills and Marcus's training. As midnight approached, the guard rotation changed again. The new pair seemed less experienced than the others, spending more time talking and less time watching their prisoner. One of them kept checking his phone, clearly bored with what he saw as babysitting duty. The other had positioned himself where Sarah's chair blocked his view of her hands. This was the opportunity she had been waiting for. Sarah completed her escape from the zip ties in 90 seconds, faster than she had ever managed during practice. Her hands were free, but she maintained her previous posture to avoid detection. Now came the critical part, accessing the weapon Marcus had hidden in her bag without alerting the guards. Her bag sat on a table 8 feet away, close enough to reach, but far enough to require careful timing. The guards were engaged in a conversation about football, their attention divided between their phones and their discussion. Sarah had perhaps 30 seconds before one of them would glance in her direction again. She moved like Marcus had taught her, fluid and silent. Her approach to the bag was indirect, using furniture to break the line of sight between herself and the guards. The Glock was exactly where she had placed it, along with the tactical flashlight Marcus had included. She palmed both items and returned to her chair without either guard noticing her absence. Now armed, Sarah faced the most difficult decision of her life. Marcus had taught her that violence should always be the last resort, but he had also taught her that when violence was necessary, it needed to be swift, decisive, and overwhelming. 6 armed men held her in an isolated location with the intention of torturing her to manipulate her husband. They were part of an organization that trafficked children. Half measures would get her killed and allow them to continue destroying innocent lives. Sarah waited for the next guard rotation, knowing that the brief confusion of personnel changes would provide her best opportunity. She had identified the locations of all 6 guards through careful observation of their voices, footsteps, and radio communications. The house layout was relatively simple. A large living area where she was held, a kitchen to the left, 3 bedrooms down a hallway to the right, and a basement where Rodriguez conducted his radio communications. When the guards changed positions at 2 in the morning, Sarah initiated her plan. The first guard never saw her coming. She approached from his blind spot, moving with the silent precision Marcus had drilled into her during countless training sessions. The tactical flashlight made an effective striking weapon when applied to the correct pressure point behind his ear. He dropped unconsciously without making a sound. Sarah acquired his rifle and checked the magazine. fully loaded with 30 rounds, exactly what Marcus would have called adequate for a small unit engagement. She moved toward the kitchen, where she could hear the second guard heating food in a microwave. The mechanical humming of the appliance would mask any small sound she made. The kitchen guard died before he understood what was happening. Sarah's first shot was perfectly placed, just as Marcus had taught her during their training sessions that she had thought were excessive preparation. The suppressor on the guard's own weapon kept the sound to a minimum, and his body fell behind the kitchen island where it wouldn't be immediately visible. 2 down, 4 to go. But now Sarah faced a more complex tactical problem. The remaining guards were spread throughout the house, and eliminating them would require movement through areas where she could be cornered or caught in crossfire. Marcus's voice echoed in her memory, reminding her that superior firepower meant nothing without superior positioning. She needed to control the battlefield, which meant forcing her enemies to come to her on her terms. Sarah returned to the living area and used the unconscious guard's radio to transmit a distress call. "Rodriguez, something's wrong. I think someone's in the house." She disguised her voice with fear and urgency, counting on the poor radio quality to mask her identity. The response was immediate. Rodriguez's voice crackled through the radio, demanding details, and she could hear movement throughout the house as guards responded to the perceived threat. They were moving toward her location, just as she had intended. Sarah positioned herself in the corner of the living room with clear sight lines to all 3 approaches. The tactical situation was almost identical to scenarios Marcus had made her practice repeatedly in their backyard using airsoft weapons. At the time, she had thought his insistence on tactical training was paranoia. Now she realized he had been preparing her for exactly this moment. The first guard appeared in the doorway from the hall, rifle ready, but moving too fast to properly clear the room. Sarah's shot caught him center mass, dropping him instantly. The second guard, approaching from the kitchen, tried to retreat when he heard the gunfire, but Sarah had anticipated his reaction. Her second shot found his target before he could reach cover. Rodriguez's voice exploded through the radio, demanding reports and threatening consequences. Sarah could hear him moving in the basement, probably trying to escape or call for backup. The sixth guard remained unaccounted for, which meant she still faced at least one armed opponent in unknown position. The house fell into tense silence, broken only by Rodriguez's increasingly frantic radio calls. Sarah maintained her position, knowing that patience was her greatest tactical advantage. Marcus had taught her that panic led to mistakes, and mistakes led to death. She controlled her breathing, maintained her sight picture, and waited for her remaining enemies to reveal themselves. Rodriguez emerged from the basement with his hands raised, but Sarah noticed he kept his right hand close to a concealed weapon. "You're making a mistake," he called toward her position. "You kill me, and your husband's team dies in the next 6 hours. We have people embedded with U.S. forces who are waiting for my signal." Sarah's response came in Marcus's voice, calm and absolutely certain. "You made the mistake when you threatened my family and decided to profit from hurting children." Rodriguez reached for his concealed weapon, confirming Sarah's assessment of his surrender as tactical deception. Her shot was perfectly placed, ending his threat and his participation in the trafficking organization that had destroyed so many innocent lives. The sixth guard never appeared, and Sarah eventually found his body in one of the bedrooms with a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Apparently, the sound of his colleagues being eliminated by someone he had assumed was a helpless elementary school teacher had proven more than his nerve could handle. As dawn approached, Sarah secured the house and began searching for intelligence that could help Marcus's team and federal authorities dismantle the trafficking organization. She found computers, documents, financial records, and communication equipment that painted a comprehensive picture of an operation spanning multiple states and involving hundreds of victims. But most importantly, she found evidence that Marcus's team was still alive and conducting their own operations against the organization's leadership. The threats against them had been manipulation tactics designed to force their cooperation through her endangerment. Sarah Mitchell had entered the house as a captive elementary school teacher. She emerged as something entirely different, a tactical operator who had eliminated 6 armed criminals and gathered intelligence that would save dozens of trafficking victims. Marcus's 8 years of training had transformed her into exactly what she needed to become when her survival and the lives of innocent people depended on her actions. The quiet military wife who taught 3rd grade was gone forever. In her place stood someone who understood that sometimes protecting innocent people required the willingness to become dangerous to those who would harm them. Sarah had discovered what she was truly capable of when everything she loved was threatened, and the answer would change her life forever. Sarah stood in the dawn light, filtering through the heavily curtained windows, surrounded by the bodies of 6 men who had planned to torture her for the amusement of child traffickers. Her hands remained steady as she methodically searched their equipment and documents, but her mind was processing the magnitude of what had just occurred. 8 hours ago, she had been an elementary school teacher worried about her deployed husband. Now, she was something else entirely. The transformation felt both sudden and inevitable. Every lesson Marcus had insisted on teaching her, every skill he had made her practice until it became instinctive, every warning about trusting her intuition had prepared her for this exact moment. She had become what he always believed she could be, a warrior capable of protecting herself and others when civilization's safeguards failed. The radio equipment Rodriguez had been using provided a direct link to the trafficking organization's communication network. As Sarah monitored their frequencies, she realized the scope of the operation Marcus's team had disrupted was far larger than she had imagined. Voices speaking in multiple languages coordinated shipments, discussed payment schedules, and referenced locations across 3 states. Most chilling were the clinical discussions about inventory and product quality that Sarah gradually understood referred to human beings, many of them children. These men spoke about destroying lives with the same casual professionalism others might use to discuss shipping cargo. The rage that had fueled her actions began crystallizing into something colder and more focused, a determination to ensure that every person involved in this evil faced justice. Using Rodriguez's computer, Sarah accessed files that revealed the trafficking network structure, financial operations, and key personnel. The organization was more sophisticated than she had expected, with legitimate business fronts, corrupted law enforcement contacts, and international connections. But it was also more vulnerable than they realized because their communication security had been compromised by their assumption that Rodriguez's safe house was impenetrable. As she downloaded files onto a secure drive she found among Rodriguez's equipment, Sarah discovered evidence that would revolutionize the federal investigation. Bank routing numbers, real estate holdings, transportation schedules, and, most importantly, a list of current victim locations. Dozens of children were being held in facilities across Southern California, waiting to be sold to buyers whose identities were also documented in the files. The sound of vehicles approaching the house interrupted her work. Sarah moved to a window and observed 3 black SUVs moving up the driveway, followed by a van marked with communications equipment. Through binoculars she found in Rodriguez's gear, she could see armed men deploying around the house with the tactical precision of military professionals. But these weren't more trafficking organization enforcers. Their equipment, movement patterns, and coordination indicated legitimate law enforcement or military personnel. Sarah's relief was tempered by caution. She had learned too much about corruption and deception in the past 12 hours to trust anyone based on appearances alone. Her phone, which had been silent since leaving the base, suddenly buzzed with an incoming call from a number she didn't recognize. Cautiously, she answered. Sarah Mitchell. The voice was male, professional, with the authoritative calm she associated with military leadership. Yes. Who is this? Commander Jake Thompson, Naval Special Warfare Command. Your husband is part of my unit. Are you safe? The question carried weight beyond simple concern for her well-being. Sarah realized this call meant Marcus's team had completed their mission and re-established communication with their headquarters. I'm safe. Rodriguez and his team are eliminated. I have intelligence about their entire operation. The silence on the other end of the line lasted long enough for Sarah to wonder if the connection had been lost. When Commander Thompson spoke again, his tone had shifted to something that sounded like professional respect. Mrs. Mitchell, we're going to need a detailed debriefing. Are you prepared to receive friendly forces at your current location? Are those your people surrounding the house? Affirmative. FBI hostage rescue team and Naval Criminal Investigative Service. Your husband's team provided your probable location after they captured the organization's leadership in Mexico. We expected to find you held captive. Not this. Sarah looked around the living room, where she had spent the past 6 hours transforming from victim to operator. Commander, I need you to understand something. The intelligence I've gathered includes current locations of trafficking victims. Time-sensitive information that could save dozens of children if acted upon immediately. Understood. We're prepared to coordinate immediate rescue operations based on your intelligence. Mrs. Mitchell, I need to ask, are you injured? Do you require medical attention? The question made Sarah pause and assess herself physically for the first time since the fighting had ended. Her wrists bore marks from the zip ties. She had several minor cuts from moving through the house in darkness, and her muscles ached from hours of sustained adrenaline. But she was functional, alert, and completely mission-capable. Negative, Commander. I'm ready to brief your teams and assist with rescue operations however I can. The front door opened as Sarah ended the call, and armed figures in tactical gear entered the house with the practiced efficiency of elite operators. Their team leader removed his helmet, revealing a man in his 40s with the weathered features and alert eyes Sarah associated with career special operations personnel. Mrs. Mitchell? Agent David Cruz, FBI hostage rescue team. We need to secure this location and get you to a safe briefing facility. His assessment of the scene was professional and thorough, taking the tactical positions of the bodies, the evidence of systematic searching, and Sarah's calm demeanor with the recognition of someone who understood what had occurred. Agent Cruz, before we leave, you need to know that Rodriguez was coordinating active operations. There are children being moved tonight, and this intelligence includes their locations and transportation schedules. Sarah handed him the secure drive containing the downloaded files. Every minute we delay means more victims disappearing into this network. Cruz examined the drive and spoke into his radio in codes Sarah didn't understand. The urgency in his voice indicated he appreciated the time-sensitive nature of the intelligence. Within minutes, the house filled with additional personnel, FBI analysts, NCIS investigators, and technical specialists who began processing the electronic evidence with the speed of professionals who understood that lives hung in the balance. As teams of federal agents established command and control operations in Rodriguez's former safe house, Sarah found herself in the unexpected position of briefing senior law enforcement officials about tactical intelligence she had gathered during her escape and elimination of the trafficking cell. Her observations about guard rotations, communication procedures, and security protocols provided crucial context for the digital intelligence she had captured. The transformation in how the agents treated her was obvious and immediate. They had arrived expecting to rescue a traumatized civilian. Instead, they found someone who could provide professional quality tactical intelligence and assist with operational planning. The respect in their voices when they addressed her carried the weight of recognition between professionals. Commander Thompson arrived by helicopter 90 minutes later, accompanied by 2 men Sarah immediately recognized as belonging to Marcus's world. They moved with the fluid awareness of elite warriors, assessed threats automatically, and communicated in the economical language of operators who trusted each other completely. Mrs. Mitchell, Commander Thompson said as they met in what had been Rodriguez's communication center, your husband's team completed their mission 4 hours ago. They're currently en route to Coronado and should arrive within 6 hours. Before they land, I need to understand exactly what occurred here and how you managed to eliminate a 6-man trafficking enforcement cell. The briefing that followed lasted 3 hours and changed how Sarah understood her own capabilities. As she described the tactical decisions, combat actions, and intelligence gathering that had led to her survival and the destruction of Rodriguez's operation, she realized she was speaking in language and concepts that would have been foreign to her 24 hours earlier. Marcus's training had done more than teach her to protect herself. It had given her the tools to think tactically, act decisively, and maintain effectiveness under extreme stress. The quiet elementary school teacher who had been zip-tied to a chair the previous evening no longer existed. In her place sat someone who could brief federal agents on combat operations with the confidence of a professional operator. The intelligence Sarah had gathered led to coordinated rescue operations across 3 states. FBI, ICE, and local law enforcement teams simultaneously raided 17 locations, rescuing 43 trafficking victims and arresting over 60 suspects. The financial intelligence she had captured allowed federal authorities to freeze millions of dollars in assets and trace the organization's connections to international trafficking networks. Most importantly, 12 children between the ages of 7 and 14 were recovered from immediate danger. Their rescue was directly attributable to the time-sensitive intelligence Sarah had prioritized during her escape and the systematic way she had processed Rodriguez's files. As the sun set on her second day of what had begun as protective custody, Sarah sat in a secure conference room at Naval Base Coronado, waiting for Marcus's return. She was no longer the person who had kissed him goodbye 3 months earlier. The events of the past 48 hours had revealed capabilities she hadn't known she possessed and changed her understanding of her role in their shared life. When Marcus walked through the door 6 hours later, still wearing his combat gear and carrying the exhaustion of successful but dangerous operations, he stopped short when he saw her face. Sarah realized he could see the change immediately, the transformation from protected civilian to proven operator. "Sarah," he said quietly, and in that single word she heard recognition, pride, and the beginning of a conversation that would redefine their relationship forever. "I got the commander's briefing. Tell me what happened." As Sarah began describing the past 2 days, she understood that she was not just recounting events to her husband. She was reporting to a fellow warrior about combat operations, tactical intelligence, and mission success. The dynamic between them had shifted permanently, and they both knew it. Marcus Mitchell's wife had become something he had always believed she could be, but had hoped she would never need to become. The quiet strength she had always possessed had been forged into something harder and more dangerous through necessity, training, and the absolute requirement to protect innocent lives when no one else could. The war had followed Marcus home, but it had discovered that home was defended by someone far more dangerous than it had ever imagined. 6 months later, Sarah stood in front of her new classroom at the FBI Academy in Quantico, Virginia, addressing a group of federal agents who were learning tactical intelligence, gathering, and threat assessment. The transformation from elementary school teacher to federal instructor still felt surreal, but the respect in her students' eyes told her that her reputation in the law enforcement community was well established. The Rodriguez incident, as it was now officially designated, had become a case study in multiple federal training programs. Sarah's tactical decisions, intelligence gathering, and successful elimination of a trafficking enforcement cell under extreme circumstances had demonstrated capabilities that impressed even veteran special operations personnel. More importantly, the intelligence she had captured had led to the dismantling of trafficking networks across 4 states and the rescue of over 200 victims. Marcus sat in the back row of her classroom, officially attending as a liaison from Naval Special Warfare Command, but actually present because he enjoyed watching his wife teach federal agents how to think like operators. Their relationship had evolved in ways neither of them had anticipated, built now on the shared understanding that they were both warriors capable of protecting what mattered most. "The key principle," Sarah explained to her class, "is that survival situations require immediate transition from victim mentality to tactical thinking. The moment you accept helplessness, you lose the initiative that could save your life and the lives of others." She moved to the whiteboard where she had diagrammed the layout of Rodriguez's safe house. In this scenario, the primary tactical advantage was the enemy's assumption about my capabilities. Agent Jennifer Walsh, a 10-year FBI veteran, raised her hand. "Mrs. Mitchell, during your captivity, what was the deciding factor that made you transition from compliance to combat operations?" Sarah considered the question carefully, as she did every time someone asked about that night. "When I overheard them discussing their plans for trafficking victims, particularly children, I realized that my survival wasn't just about saving my own life. My compliance would enable continued crimes against innocent people. At that point, the moral calculus became clear. The room fell quiet as the agents absorbed the implications. Sarah had learned that most law enforcement personnel understood the weight of that decision, the moment when personal survival intersected with professional duty to protect others. It was a line that defined the difference between civilians and those who chose to stand between evil and innocent people. After class, Marcus joined Sarah for their drive home to the small house they had purchased near the base. Their conversations during these drives had become a cherished routine, a time to decompress from their respective duties and reconnect as husband and wife rather than tactical professionals. Commander Thompson wants you to consider the Advanced Instruction Program, Marcus said as they left the academy grounds, teaching tactical intelligence to special operations units directly. Sarah nodded, knowing this offer represented recognition at the highest levels of the special operations community. I've been thinking about it. The work at Quantico is important, but there's something appealing about teaching people who might face situations similar to what I experienced. Their new life bore little resemblance to the quiet routine they had maintained in Coronado. Sarah's federal position required security clearances, regular travel, and involvement in cases that couldn't be discussed even between them. Marcus's deployments continued, but now they briefed each other on threat assessments and tactical considerations with the shared language of professionals who understood operational risks. The elementary classroom, where Sarah had once taught third graders about heroes, felt like a memory from someone else's life. Her current students were federal agents, military personnel, and intelligence analysts who needed to understand how ordinary people could become extraordinary when circumstances demanded it. But perhaps the most significant change was in how they understood their role in each other's safety. Marcus no longer worried about protecting Sarah from his dangerous world. Instead, he trusted her to be an active participant in their mutual security. Sarah no longer felt like a liability during his deployments. She knew she was capable of handling whatever threats might emerge in his absence. That evening, as they reviewed intelligence briefings in their secure home office, Sarah received a call that would test their new dynamic once again. Special Agent Crawford from the FBI's Human Trafficking Task Force needed her consultation on a case involving suspected trafficking operations near military bases. "We've identified communication patterns similar to what you encountered with Rodriguez," Crawford explained over the secure line. The suspect appeared to be targeting military families specifically, probably hoping to leverage deployments and family separations. Sarah listened to the briefing with the focused attention of a professional operator, taking notes and asking tactical questions that would have been unthinkable during her previous life. "Agent Crawford, do you need on-site consultation or remote analysis of the intelligence?" "We prefer you on-site. Your experience with trafficking organization tactics and military family targeting makes you uniquely qualified for this investigation." Marcus looked up from his own briefing materials as Sarah ended the call. The look they exchanged carried conversations they had learned to have without words: assessment of operational risk, consideration of timing with his deployment schedule, and mutual confidence in each other's capabilities. 2 weeks in Atlanta, Sarah said. Trafficking investigation with military family targeting. Are you comfortable with that timeline? Marcus's answer came without hesitation. Completely. You're the best qualified person they could have for that mission. The casual use of the word mission to describe Sarah's federal assignments reflected how completely their perspective on her work had shifted. She was no longer a civilian who occasionally helped law enforcement. She was a tactical professional whose expertise saved lives and protected national security interests. As they prepared for bed that night, Sarah reflected on the path that had led from zip ties in Rodriguez's safe house to federal credentials and tactical instruction responsibilities. The journey had revealed capabilities she hadn't known she possessed and changed her understanding of her own identity. The woman who had once worried about Marcus's dangerous deployments now deployed on her own federal assignments with confidence in her training and abilities. The wife who had once felt helpless about her husband's classified missions now held security clearances that allowed her to understand and contribute to similar operations. Marcus emerged from the bathroom and found Sarah reviewing case files for her upcoming Atlanta assignment. He sat beside her on their bed and watched her work with the same focused intensity he brought to his own operational planning. "Do you ever miss teaching third grade?" he asked quietly. Sarah considered the question seriously, as she did most things these days. "I miss the simplicity of it, sometimes. The way 8-year-olds see the world in clear categories of right and wrong. But I don't miss feeling helpless about things that matter. And this feels like it matters? Every trafficking victim we recover, every network we dismantle, every child we save from that life." Sarah paused and met his eyes. "Yes, this matters in ways that teaching multiplication tables never could." Marcus nodded with the understanding of someone who had chosen a similar path for similar reasons. They had both dedicated their lives to protecting people who couldn't protect themselves, accepting the risks and sacrifices that commitment required. The next morning, Sarah packed for Atlanta with the same methodical precision Marcus used for his deployments. Tactical gear, secure communications equipment, federal credentials, and the Glock that had saved her life and countless others since Rodriguez's safe house. The weapon Marcus had hidden for emergencies had become standard equipment for a federal agent whose expertise in trafficking organizations made her a valuable target. As Marcus drove her to the airport, they discussed operational security protocols and communication schedules with the professional efficiency of experienced operators. The conversation would have been incomprehensible to their former selves, but it represented the natural evolution of a partnership between two people committed to dangerous but essential work. At the departure gate, their goodbye carried the weight of professionals who understood operational risks but trusted each other's training and judgment completely. Sarah boarded the plane as a federal agent, deploying on a mission that could save dozens of trafficking victims. Marcus returned to base to prepare for his own deployment, confident that his wife was one of the most dangerous people any criminal organization could face. Sarah Mitchell had learned what she was capable of when everything she loved was threatened, and the answer had changed her life forever. The quiet elementary school teacher was gone, replaced by someone who stood between evil and innocent people with the skills and determination to win that fight. But perhaps most importantly, she had discovered that strength and gentleness weren't opposite qualities. In her new classroom at Quantico, she taught federal agents tactical principles with the same care and patience she had once used to teach children reading. The warrior she had become enhanced rather than replaced the teacher she had always been. As her plane lifted off toward Atlanta and another mission to protect trafficking victims, Sarah reflected on the truth that had emerged from Rodriguez's safe house. Sometimes the most dangerous person in a room is the one nobody sees coming. And sometimes an elementary school teacher is exactly the hero the situation requires. The trafficking organizations that had once targeted military families as soft targets now faced a reality they hadn't anticipated. Those families included people like Sarah Mitchell, who possessed both the skills to fight back and the moral conviction to ensure justice reached those who profited from human suffering. Marcus had taught her to be ready for anything. Rodriguez had taught her what she was capable of when readiness met necessity. Now she used both lessons to protect others who found themselves facing the same evil she had overcome. The war against trafficking continued, but it now included a warrior the criminals had created through their own miscalculation, someone who looked like their ideal victim, but fought like their worst nightmare. Sarah Mitchell had become something they could never defeat, because she fought not just for herself, but for every innocent person they threatened. And she was just getting started.